It was the kind of cold New York morning where the wind cut like glass through even the thickest coats. But inside the towering steel and glass headquarters of Whitmore Industries, the air was even colder. Not because of the temperature, but because of the arrogance radiating from the man standing at the head of the sleek, glass-walled conference room. Gregory Whitmore, the CEO, was a man whose very presence made people straighten in their chairs, a man who had the kind of power that allowed him to smirk at problems that could sink entire careers. On the table before him sat a gleaming $500,000 piece of German-engineered technology, a prototype for a high-security government contract that could bring in hundreds of millions. The only problem was that the machine was dead. No hum, no lights, no sign of life. It had been airlifted in the night before for a last-minute demonstration, but when the team powered it up, it refused to work. The best engineers in the company had worked for 12 straight hours, fueled by bitter coffee and desperation, flipping through schematics, running diagnostics, checking every possible failure point. But nothing worked. The contract deadline was hours away, and failure would not just cost money, it would destroy reputations. Gregory paced slowly around the table, his polished Italian shoes clicking against the marble floor, his eyes moving over the anxious faces of his top people. "This is it?" he said finally, his voice low and dripping with disdain. "This is what my best and brightest have to offer?" No one dared to answer. "Millions of dollars in salaries," he continued, "and not one of you can make this thing work." He stopped at the head of the table, resting his hand on the cold metal casing of the prototype. "Tell you what, let's make it interesting. Whoever fixes this today gets my car, my Lamborghini Aventador. Keys, title, all yours." The room went still, save for the faint hum of the air vents. The Lamborghini was legendary in the company, a screaming orange symbol of Gregory's wealth and ego. It was parked downstairs, in the executive garage, like a museum piece. "Of course," he added with a smirk. "I'm not worried. None of you could fix this if your lives depended on it." That's when the nervous chuckles began, the hollow, sycophantic laughter of people too scared to be silent. And that's when Gregory's gaze shifted toward the far corner of the room, where a man stood half hidden in the shadows, leaning slightly on a mop handle. Thomas Gray, the night janitor, tall and broad-shouldered, with a graying beard and deep lines etched into his face from years of hard work, wore a faded Navy uniform and scuffed boots that had seen better days. He had been in the room the entire time, moving quietly, cleaning around the engineers as they argued and tinkered. Gregory tilted his head, his smirk deepening. "Hey, Tom," he called out, his tone somewhere between a joke and an insult. "You know anything about this? Maybe you can fix it and drive my Lambo home tonight?" The room erupted in laughter again, louder this time, because nothing bound them together faster than the safe cruelty of mocking someone they thought was beneath them. But Thomas didn't smile. He leaned the mop against the wall, wiped his hands on his pants, and stepped forward. "Mind if I take a look, sir?" he asked, his voice calm and even. Gregory chuckled. "Be my guest. Just don't make it worse." The laughter rolled again, but it died quickly as Thomas approached the table. He didn't touch the machine right away. He just looked at it, his dark eyes scanning every inch of its frame, his mind turning over something quietly. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn multi-tool, something no one would expect to see in a room like this. He crouched slightly, loosened a small panel near the base, and began making tiny adjustments with the kind of practiced precision that comes from years of knowing exactly what you're doing. His hands were steady, his movements deliberate. He didn't fumble or hesitate. Less than 5 minutes later, there was a soft click, followed by a low, steady hum. The machine's indicator lights flickered, then glowed bright and constant. The internal system spun up, running perfectly. The engineers stared. A few audibly gasped. Thomas stepped back, folded the multi-tool, and slipped it back into his pocket. "There you go," he said quietly. The room was silent now. Gregory's smirk had vanished. How did you do that?" he asked, his voice stripped of its earlier mockery. Thomas met his gaze for the first time. "I used to be a lead engineer here," he said evenly. 15 years ago, before the downsizing. I helped design the first generation of this system. Guess some things you don't forget." His tone wasn't bitter. It was calm, matter of fact, carrying the weight of a man who knew his worth even if the world had tried to erase it. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Gregory shifted his stance, suddenly aware of the weight of his own words. "Well, I suppose a deal's a deal," he said after a moment. "The car is yours." Thomas shook his head. "I don't want your car, Mr. Whitmore. I want you to remember this. The people you overlook might be the ones holding everything together." He turned, picked up his mop, and returned to the corner. That night, the story spread through the building like wildfire. By morning, Thomas wasn't invisible anymore. People greeted him by name. Some stopped to apologize for laughing. Others asked about his past, and for the first time in years, he told it. 2 weeks later, Gregory called him into his office, not to fire him, but to offer him his old engineering job back with a senior title, full benefits, and the respect he'd been denied for so long. Thomas accepted, not because he needed the validation, but because he knew that sometimes the best way to change a place is from the inside. From that day forward, every time Gregory passed him in the hall, there was no smirk, only a quiet nod. And every time Gregory saw the Lamborghini in his garage, he remembered the day the man he'd mocked reminded him that respect is worth more than any car. And if you're hearing this now, remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. They might just be the reason the world around you keeps running. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else be reminded that worth isn't measured by titles, but by heart, skill, and the will to never stop being who you are. Be the reason someone feels seen today.